Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yep, that looks great.
Okay. Thank you so much for the Australian section to allow me to present tonight there. As Louis mentioned, it is 2:30 a.m. in Idaho in the U.S. So if I slur my words, I'm not drunk. Haha. Okay. So I do have 16 years of experience in scheduling project controls. Most of those were in the power industry, and I am currently working for the FAA subcontractor. That's for all you that don't know, that's basically all the airplane towers and the radio systems and all of the domestic flights within the U.S., but we also cover a lot of international areas too that correlate with the U.S., of course. And then I also worked at an Idaho National Laboratories here in Idaho, which is it's got one of the few nuclear reactors left in the U.S. I do hold planning and scheduling professionals certification through the AACE, and I've had that since 2011. And then I also hold a PMP through the PMI group since 2018. I currently work at Quebec Consulting as a senior consultant. They are located out of Washington, D.C. I have always worked for them remote, so with COVID, nothing really changed for me. And then I'm also the current AACE International Women in Project Control Committee Chair. So I actually have a little blurb at the end of my presentation for that. And then something you may not know about me is I love to water ski, camp, and spend time with family and friends. So we'll jump into our recovery schedule, and the definition, as in the international recommended practice, is a specialized schedule showing special efforts to recover time lost compared to the master schedule, often a contract requirement when the project finish date is no longer projecting contractual completion. Baseline schedules. Also, believe a lot of people call them contract schedules. It's basically the schedules that all the stakeholders agree on, and you make that your plan to move forward with the project, usually early in the project. So the baseline could be set after all the schedule development has been completed and all of the stakeholders have approved the schedule. And then we do schedule updates, or we status. A lot of people here in the States say statusing of the project schedule should occur regularly, where it reflects the current status of the project. And those things can include actual dates, actual logic, percent completes, actual man hours, or delays or impacts on the project. Revising the schedule forms a basis for the recovery schedule development, and these can be change in logic and lags, change in durations, adding and deleting activities, changing resources, or even changing calendars or work times for different resources. And that becomes our recovery schedule. This is an evolution of the schedule. We start with our approved baseline or our contract schedule, and then we do our schedule updates as the project starts and moves along, and then recovery schedule comes in when there's a significant change in the schedule to where we need to make up time in the schedule and able to meet our contract date at the end. So then, of course, we get that approved, and it becomes our new baseline or contract schedule. And then, of course, we do more schedule updates. And then at the end, we have our as-built schedule, which shows the actual of all the project through that schedule. So we have a lot of recovery options, and a lot of those, of course, a bad one to do if it's significant is ignoring the impact to the schedule. We have where we can add a lot of resources, or we can add time on the end of the schedule, you know, push the end date out. And then we can submit partial, where we're adding some time and adding money. Of course, all that you want to evaluate. And then full submission could be all added resources or all added time for those options. So here's a curve, as you will, kind of shows you the little differences on things that may occur. Say if we're accelerating the schedule only, then the cost is going to go up because you're adding resources in order to keep that timeline intact. And then if you add in the EOT is estimated of time / acceleration. So if you do time and acceleration, you're there in the middle. And then the estimate of time only, then it's going to be less cost, but it's going to take you a lot more time to finish your project. Now, there's a lot of things that you need to consider when you're doing a recovery schedule. The cost and time recovering trade-offs, which is, you know, what we're calling is acceleration. You need to identify critical milestones, involve all of the team, and get their buy-in is crucial. So basically you're reapproving basically your baseline schedule like you did at the beginning of the project. You need to identify the owner's requirements, anything that's in the scope of work or contractually obligated deliverables. You need to make sure that those are met in this recovery schedule. And then you need to document any kind of assumptions that you have made while doing this recovery schedule and making it your new baseline. And it's very important to be very realistic. No pie in the skies. You need to assess what's possible and keep with something that's very realistic to get your end goal on getting the project complete at the end date. And of course, when done, when you have your new baseline or recovery schedule, you need to monitor the progress against the recovery schedule that you had completed. So there's several strategies of how you can do this to save cost and time, or combination of those. So fast tracking is when you sequence the dependencies between activities to partial dependencies. So you can do a finish to start logic, what's the FS, is reduced, or the start to start logic or leads are introduced to the force parallel work. So if you have two activities that are finish to start logic, and you can change the logic in it to be start to start, then they're running in parallel, so that it saves you a lot of time. Reviewing constraints and lags assumptions. If you reassess assumptions related to the activities to begin at certain times. So so in the software, you can constrain it to where you say must start at X date, or you can must finish on X date, and that can force some activities, but you got to be cautious with that, just because with the critical path schedule, you have your logic in there for a reason, to basically set up so-called alarms of what things may get pushed out if something is late. And then any lag assumptions is, you know, if you say an activity is going to start 5 days after another one has already started, you need to make sure that those assumptions are correct. And that can be added or minus in that lag to help you make up time. Splitting long activities, that may help you shorten activities to begin a certain date. Say you're doing foundations for a building and it's holding off any other building for, say, framing the building. You can do part of the concrete first and get that curing while you're pouring the other part, so that, you know, the framing can continue. And crashing the schedule is adding resources. So you're just adding in your many more workers for the workforce to get the job done. Say instead of 8 man-hours or 8 individual man-hours per day, you're going to double that to make up the time that is lost. Another thing you can do is to reduce your scope. So you can decrease the scope, reducing both the duration and the cost. So that would be a contractual agreement between you and the primary stakeholders. You can review the estimate. Duration estimate should be revisited using the progress report as actuals on the efforts recorded on the project. Add overtime and reduce vacations. So basically you're having your same crews working just longer hours, and assign overtime to that allocated resource to make up time. Your schedule contingencies, a lot of that is in your risk management programs. You allocate contingencies knowing, say, weather. And say if you know that there's going to be a lot of bad winter weather, you're going to add days in your contingency so that you know that's a possibility, and it can mitigate that right off the bat. So a good way to analyze all of your strategies is to do critical path what if schedules. So you just basically make another file or another version of the schedules, and you're able to work through the critical path to see how one activity is going to affect the other. So it gives you a clear path of what choice is best to either crash or fast track, any of those things. So this is an example of a recovery schedule. So it's at the top, we're doing nothing to accelerate activities. So basically we're going to be remaining for 10 weeks. And so we've got all these different activities and the cost of them. So you're going to look through the activities and the cost and see where you can save time that's going to cost you the least amount of money. So in this scenario, we actually have 2 options. We have the accelerated activities EDU, where it's got actually 3 activities all linked together. It's going to save us 10 days, and it's only going to cost us $1,600. And then also we could crash the S activity and the H activity going to actually that same amount of time. We're going to have 5 plus 5 is, which equals 10 days, and then the 700 plus the 900 is also $1,600. So we have 2 choices in this example. Verification of the recovery schedule needs to be very legitimized so that you can make sure that everything is what you want it to be when you're doing the schedule recovery, to make everything adequate and also as accurate as possible. So correct any schedule updates that may have been incorrect. Critical and near pass, you want to look at that through your what if schedules and make sure that you're not missing something that you may have forgotten about. Specific activities may be identified to be able to be fast-tracked or crashed. And then your man-hour allocations. You need to look at the allocations, so when you're over allocating resources, it's not a problem, because you can't, for instance, make one man work 24 hours a day for an entire week to try to make up the schedule. So you have to, that's where you're adding resources in making that work. Historical productivity rates can really help you figure out what is possible as far as saving duration when you're looking at the time it's going to take for that to certain activities to be completed. The electronic version is always best to review, not a PDF, because, for instance, if you're on a spreadsheet or you're looking at a calculation, the electronic version is going to show that formula. Scheduled diagnostic reports. This is something Primavera does that can actually give you insight to any errors in your schedule that you may need to correct before you finalize the recovery schedule. Schedule changes and validate and supported. You want to make sure that the entire team understands what changes you're going to be making, and it is supported by all of the stakeholders. And this all, you should require a recovery worksheet to help you work through that. So next steps, I actually have a recovery worksheet in the next slide. For verification, we want to collaborate, meetings, schedule, review live, where you're showing the schedule, and you can show people kind of the what if schedule so they can see how it affects the entire project, not just their task per se. Group by critical path, which I kind of alluded to, and then agree on the activities and the cost that you're going to assume in the recovery schedule. And then, of course, monitoring your plan is essential. And then, of course, you want the recovery schedule and plan signed by the CO. So this is an example of a recovery worksheet. You want to have your original durations, your expedited durations, your crew size, man hours, and your total recovery cost. And then you're going to compare it to your potential cost of reduction, your method of recovery, and your total float, or from your schedule updates, and then total float from a recovery schedule. Notes on this side will tell you, is it on a critical path? Is there something special that you need to look at? For instance, is the remaining duration just contingency? Is that something that you can shorten the duration? Or also, is there something there that you can run in parallel? And of course, you go through and you add up the spreadsheet. Oops, I'm sorry, and see where it's kind of the total cost of your adjustments are, and make sure you get the buy off from all parties, all groups. The risk of acceleration efforts is not always effective. It can excusable delays, responsibility for delays to recover the schedule, cost recovering under the direct acceleration is not always effective. So you need to really evaluate what you're doing before you move forward with the recovery schedule. In conclusion, good scheduling, foundational elements. You want to make sure that there's no errors. You go through the errors like we discussed, and make sure that you have a good schedule to make a good foundation for moving forward. Your contract provisions, everything that you change in the recovery schedule will need to be contractually backed up with signed documents, so all parties agree. Early identification of the impacts. If you're able to see a problem earlier, the better. That's where a good scheduler can look at the schedule and look ahead, you know, where you do like your 60-day look ahead, 90-day look ahead, and see things that are going to impact the schedule coming up that you know may be a problem. You need to address that as soon as possible so that you can mitigate. Compliance with notification requirements. If there's several times in the contract, you may say there's a rule where they want all schedulers to notify if there's something 1 day late, and so you have to notify officially to your peers that is going to be late. Recovery schedule coordination with all of the stakeholders and the team is essential. Get your buy-in is crucial. Everybody's got to agree to schedule because they've got to abide by that and work to that to make it effective. There's always cost and schedule trade-offs when you're doing recovery schedule. You go through your spreadsheets and analyze with your what-if schedules. And then closely monitor your progress. Is there any questions?
Yes, Cindy. Thank you for the presentation. We have a bunch of questions. The first question made by Louis is, what triggers the need for a recovery schedule?
If there's a significant change in the schedule, say, well, COVID-19 is perfect case in point. You know, the government shut down not only delivery of equipment, but any field work that is done. So in that case, you would need to do a recovery schedule with a plan to move forward after those restrictions have lifted.
Yeah, a follow-up question in that regard. I was wondering, in terms of SPI, the performance indicator for the scheduling performance, is there a number that you may suggest in which we say, okay, we need a recovery schedule? Let's say if we have an SPI of 0.7, it means it triggers the need for a schedule recovery schedule?
I really wouldn't say that there's a certain SPI that would negate a recovery schedule because projects are so different. I believe it's a project by project, case by case analysis that you would need to do. The contract's the important part on that because you got to meet the contract requirements.
Cindy, how do you deal with contractors and making them do a recovery schedule that's going to cost them more time and hopefully less, more money and hopefully less time? contractors are very loath to admit they've got a problem. They'll try and work it through internally in their own backyard, you know?
Yeah, in my experience, everything is contractual, where they have deliverables, where they have to have things completed by X date. And a lot of the contracts nowadays actually have a penalty, which is money if they don't finish projects or milestones of the project on time. So it behooves them to recognize that they have a problem and mitigate that and figure out a better solution than the penalties that they may endure.
Okay.
Okay. The next question is, how do you deal with poor productivity on specific scheduled activities?
Poor productivity?
For example, we often plan and say a contractor can install 100 cubic meters of concrete a day, for example, and when he comes to the field, he only can starting to get 50 or 60. How do you then highlight that, and how do you get him to sort of start to ramp up, either more cubic meters poured or more resources to pour more meters?
Something that I've done in my experience is we have a bi-weekly meeting called a schedules objective meeting, and you basically get all of your leads in a room and you discuss the productivity back to the historical rates of what you track how many their work have been able to finish and what needs to be finished, and you bring to the table that ratio and quantify that there's an issue. It needs to either add more resources or we have a schedule problem.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. We're certainly finding that difficult to pin contractors down to nominate what their production rates are going to be in their contract. So well said.
Yeah, so I would say just keep on top of it, meet with them regularly, and know what they should have finished to that date.
Yeah.
Okay, Karen was asking us as well, what is the best way to determine the cost impact of the change? How is this best achieved within the schedule?
So if your cost and schedule, you have to do that spreadsheet or that I'm gonna go up here. So if you do this, I'm sorry. I shouldn't go so quickly, huh? So if basically you have to look at it and do a worksheet, and so you're basically comparing the time and cost. It's actually that other table that I did earlier that would help with that more, but basically you got to analyze your time versus cost and choose the best way to recover your schedule.
So there's a direct correlation between the cost item breakdown and the schedule item breakdown.
Yes.
That's
so money
important.
Is time. Time is money.
Yeah. Sure is.
Okay, then Alberto is also asking, in your experience, how can you deal with concurrent delays when the client asks you to mitigate the delays in the schedule, the recovery versus acceleration?
Well, if it's continuous, I guess it depends on the project, but I mean, that's the whole point of a recovery schedule, is if the schedule gets behind or the project gets behind in the schedule and you need to meet a contractual finish, then that's the reason why you try to come up with a plan to either add resources to make sure that the schedule or the project is done in time. Because you want to be on time, on budget for your project. And if that's not happening and it's a continuous problem, then I would meet with these people regularly and ask them exactly what they're doing to negate the issues and why it's slow, and then do a recovery schedule based on what is doable. For instance, if you're waiting for an equipment that you can't install it until that equipment, then you're going to need to do a recovery schedule based on the new delivery of the equipment schedule, because you can't install equipment that's not delivered. So that's just something that I would probably meet weekly on, and ask direct questions. Where's the production? When is it going to be here? At what site?
Also, in your experience, what's your experience with measuring progress to input to the schedule?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. Say it again.
Yeah, what's your experience with measuring progress to input to the schedule? Like, what is the technique to measure progress to get into the schedule?
So when we progress the schedule, you need to do that bi-weekly or monthly, depending on the project, and you just need to make sure that people are giving you actual progress, not just oh yeah, I'm supposed to be 50% done with this right now, so I am. You want to make sure that they're actual, so that you get a true
Cindy,
schedule.
sorry, Cindy, do you do the progress calcs outside the schedule? For example, quantities, yes. and then input it. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's really about deliverables achieved.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, if you cost load or resource load your schedule, then you're going to have a lot of those costs in your what if schedules when you run those. If you're not doing the cost inside the schedule, then you need to do the cost in whatever form and compare it with the schedule, knowing that the correlation again is time equals money and that kind of thing. So you can either do it within the schedule or outside, depending on the project.
Okay, and the last question, any experience on projects where you experienced lower than expected productivity and how this was improved?
Yes, I was working on a power line project, and the poles were not getting produced fast enough to get delivered to the field for the field to put them in for the power line being built. So what happened was we had these bi-weekly meetings with the equipment, or the people that were building the poles. These are 150-foot poles, and just kept on top of it. And by doing that, the end of the project, actually, we ended the project early and saved $10 million. So by project controls, we were able to mitigate what seemed to be a huge problem in the beginning. But by noticing it right off the bat and getting a plan to move forward, what happened is the production people actually added more plants to build, so they were able to build the poles faster because they had a contractual agreement to do so, and the penalty was harsher than what it cost them to add more plants into the production.
Great. Well, I have one last question in terms of how long it takes to construct a recovery schedule. I know it depends on the scale of the project, but if I need to compare the recovery schedule versus the baseline schedule, what would be the relationship? How long it would take?
If we're talking about just schedule analytics, again, yes, of course, it's based on how large your schedule is, but you want to make sure that you go through it very accurately to be able to get it. And of course, you're going to be meeting with other people. You, as a scheduler, are not going to be the only person that has input you're going to have all of your stakeholders input in how to recover this schedule, because it's going to be a contract change. So really there isn't a timeline, because it you know, a 250 line schedule versus a 5,000 line schedule is a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Cindy. I think we're in the perfect time to continue with the second part of the event. If there's no more questions, Paul, Louis, can you please go back to your slide so we can?
Sure. Yeah, I'd just like to thank you, Cindy, for that presentation. It was very insightful. And for me, it really reinforced a couple of important issues. For example, the direct correlation between your cost breakdown and your schedule activities. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you again for allowing me to present. I really enjoy getting up at 2 a.m. haha, but I'm happy to do it, and thank you for allowing me to do so.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to take back the presentation now.
Okay.
So if you